you've stayed with us this long, you're in for a treat, because we've been talking the whole 2 days about needing to change so many things. To me, at the core of it is we need to change the way we talk about transportation, the frames we use, right? And to be honest, most of us, transportation and mobility experts, we understand each other, but you go out to any public meeting and what are you talking about? What's VMT? And all of that. So our treat today is we get to hear from Andy Boenau, who is a mobility storyteller. Every department should have a chief storyteller, I swear, because the way we tell stories really matter, particularly in this age. So he's a mobility storyteller who looks for ways to simplify the complex. Words have been Andy's playground since he was about 2 years old. Right? And he has served as chief marketing officer for startups, held corporate roles where he was responsible for messaging and authority building. I like that, authority building. He also teaches mobility professionals how to develop and share stories in ways that resonate with customers, politicians, and the media. So beyond shaming them, really telling them the stories that actually would stick and that they can tell. And he's won awards for writing, filmmaking, photography, and podcasting. He hosts 2 podcasts, How We Get Around and Urbanism Speakeasy. Help me welcome Andy Boenau.
Thank you, Benji. Yes, awesome. They give me just 2 buttons because I find a way to mess things up when it gets complex. Oh, how's this? Better? All right. And special request from Peter Norton. He asked me to give a new talk called Our Future is Autonomous, and how must we get there? So, okay, not actually. Oh, good. So this is going to be up at the beginning, and then I'll put it back up at the end. This book, looks like a shameless plug, and I am a for-profit entity. However, this is going to be made available for free when I put the finishing touches on it. So this code here, you can both get in touch with me and get on the list to receive a copy if you're interested in this stuff. I tell this to you now because you haven't heard me talk yet, so maybe by the end you're like, I don't know, why did I get that book? But that code is for you. Pardon me while I make sure. All right. So, you guys made it. The last bit of sitting in chairs, I'm sure you're a little bit antsy. I'm antsy too. I'm moving my clock around so that I make sure that I get us out of here mostly on time. I mean, the good news is they didn't really give me enough time to talk so long that you'd be put to sleep. The bad news is, what if I take that as a challenge? I'm probably just kidding. In the early 90s, I began a 6-year period of truancy. I didn't run away from home, and in fact, my parents were complicit. We lived in Fairfax County, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. It's known for its very well-performing schools, but my family opted out. We tried, I say we like I was a decision maker. We tried homeschooling with a few other families. It was sort of this team effort because it wasn't going to happen if it was just my parents with my sister and I. So now, 2022, homeschooling is basically mainstream. We probably have COVID lockdowns to thank for that. But 30 years ago, homeschooling was very much fringe. My parents submitted this paperwork to the county, but the county didn't give their blessing right away. So we jumped into it anyway. Every time I rode my bike to Errol's Video or to Little Caesars, my mom was afraid that I was going to get my teenage self into a confrontation with the cops, because that's what teenage boys do, right? Like, they can come and get me. That was my reason for liking homeschooling. So a few years into this experiment of homeschooling, and without any arrests, but still truant, my parents learned that the community colleges would audit for free classes for high school kids. So chemistry, biology, physics, all those complex classes that also make a mess of the kitchen. So my dad got us a meeting with the community college dean, and all 4 of us go in there to plead the case. And we had no idea with this particular authority if he's going to be more concerned about preserving the system and its rules, or with helping kids learn some science. So we go in his office, and this dean has a University of Florida diploma on his wall. It just so happens my dad went to Florida. So we start this small talk about the Gators. And then Dean gets around to business, and he's like, okay. How can I help you? So my dad delivers this pitch that even at that time, I was so impressed by. And again, I'm his teenage son. I'm not supposed to be impressed by anything that my dad has to say. And what happened was he gave a recap of this community college's mission statement. And then he gave a few statistics about their student demographics. And then he started to describe this group of underserved students, underserved families across the country, but also right here in Fairfax County. So this population of high school students who were being denied access to a college education. So this dean, I mean, in my memory, it's this exaggerated, kind of friendly grandpa figure. He leans on his desk and he's like, who is it? Who could this possibly be? So my dad's like, homeschoolers, these 2 charming children. It's this growing population. So then he went into this spiel about why they had decided to try education at home for a couple of high school age kids. He went on to tell this dean how this dean himself and this community college could be a model for schools all across the country who could serve members of their community who had this alternative way of education, some hybrid of school and homeschool. Sometimes it was unschooling, whatever the thing. They could be a model with their own mission statement for this group that they had no idea existed. And my sister and I still remember, we'll joke about this from time to time to this day, trying to keep our jaws up and not hanging open because, one, we didn't want to look like oddballs any more than we already were, but also we didn't want my parents to like, wow, our kids are so impressed with what Dad's doing right now. But this wasn't supposed to happen. This system had rules in place to keep the riffraff out, and it was orderly and predictable. So my dad basically goes in there, straight-laced as he is, like an Iggy Pop, disguised as Barry Manilow, because they needed this punk rock attitude, but delivered sort of as a crooner. And that's exactly what he did. And what happened? We ended up enrolled long enough to get associate's degrees. My sister's an OB now, all because this dean was so intoxicated by this, and he was like, how many of you are there? When can you start taking classes? They just had no idea. All of this, I think, I mean, each step of that way in my own experience in that has to do with this kind of work that we're doing. It's a variation on the same kind of thing where you have to convince a Department of Public Works to install physically protected bicycle lanes or make a better transit shelter. The principle is the same. My dad had to figure out who that audience was, what the shared interests were, and then make that sale. And that's exactly what he did. There wasn't money exchanged in that meeting, but that's what he was doing. So my goal is for you all to leave this room knowing 2 things. You only have to remember 2 things. And that is the process for mobility storytelling and the mindset for mobility storytelling. So if you ask a web designer how to build a homepage, they could give you 2 different answers in this same kind of way. One is the process. They could say, well, you purchase a domain, you load a content management system, and then you go ahead and you add in all your content. That's the process. And then another answer, you could say, how do you build a website? They could say, well, design a user experience for your audience. And that's also a correct answer. They both will help you build an online home. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently, this idea of both process and storytelling, because sometimes I'm a slow learner, many times I'm a slow learner, but I've been seeing this process, looking a little bit in the rearview mirror, this pattern emerge over the last few years with projects that I've been involved in. And the pattern goes like this. I'll give a talk or lead a workshop around storytelling, and especially something like, it's the nuts and bolts of how do you copy proven screenwriting or movie kind of storytelling, how do you copy and paste that? And the audience will be just a lot like this. It'll be planners and engineers and advocates. But then after the talk, inevitably, the audience questions or the Q&A discussion, it always goes to mindset. And so this is the slower learner in me. I realize I need to start focusing more on that while I'm doing these conversations or sometimes just talks about the beats of storytelling, because I want to make sure that you leave the room not just with process, but also mindset. And it's things like you'll leave wondering, okay, but how do I get the right messaging for my particular organization? How can I use stories to unite people or a community? How do I use them to persuade because I need to get funding or whatever the thing is? So some of these ideas, some of it might be a little bit uncomfortable. I don't think anything is outrageous, but you might, as we're going through this, think, well, why should I listen to this guy anyway? That is good and natural of a response. But I'll give you a brief connection to why me in this storytelling with mobility. So I started my work as a traffic engineer 24 years ago. And over the years, it's the people that some of us to this day love to mock. That was me. I am one of those. But over the years, I've worked in a variety of transportation roles. So it's traffic safety and street design and bicycle infrastructure. Walkability analysis, and sometimes economic development, but always having to do with people trying to get from here to there. All of this work delivered in some way transportation solutions for the traveling public. I was working for consulting firms, but that's who we're trying to serve, is the traveling public. And all of this work involved in some way outreach and engagement with communities. I wasn't always leading it, but both of those things were always happening. Some kind of solution and some kind of engagement. And my extreme bias that I've established over the years is I want everybody to be able to have access to all the options. So I also love for there to be walking and bicycling opportunities, but that's where I'm coming from. I want people to be able to have access to all the different types of options. And we're all here at this event, and even the people that weren't lucky enough to stay through all of the final receptions and goodness with us, we all have this shared interest to promote shared mobility. And you have to think to yourself, if it's so amazing, why isn't it ubiquitous? What's keeping communities not only from accepting it, but begging for it? And it doesn't have to be all the modes and all the options, but just why isn't there more of a groundswell? Like, give me some more of that shared mobility stuff. It's because we have a communications problem. We get the storytelling process wrong, or we get the storytelling mindset wrong, or in my experience, me included, we'll get both of those things wrong. It's totally understandable, I think, even inevitable, if you consider how humans go through school. Schooling as we know it today was designed to create conformity. Soldiers and factory workers, that's what the system was designed to do. So it's sit in a chair, listening for a whole bunch of hours to an adult, say important things, and then memorize all the same material in the same amount of time as all the kids around you in the class. And then take tests to prove that you're just like all the kids around you and memorized all the stuff that the kids around you memorized. And then if you get all that right, you get to advance to another class and do it all over again. That's schooling. Storytelling goes against our school training. Storytelling is designed to make somebody stop and notice. It's absolutely not conformity. So if 5 different companies are pitching their street design services, it's pointless to say, you should pick us because we've gone through all the classes and coursework to learn all the details about street design. That's every civil engineer, right? Nobody's getting excited about your piece of paper that demonstrates you can sit still and listen to a teacher. If you want to win more contracts, or if you want to get more policy changed, you want to motivate your elderly parents to try buying or at least riding an electric bicycle, then you're going to have to learn to be comfortable around the edges or fringes. This is not an extrovert or introvert thing. This is a human nature difficult thing. Biologists will tell you that this is really hard because humans see in all walks of life, of all types of creatures, this is counterintuitive. A school of fish looks like a giant shimmery blob to a predator. The healthy, strong fish are in the center of the school. The fringe is bait. So we see this in nature, but I guess in that sense, I would say you're not fish. So embrace your non-fishiness. Try doing something that's at the fringe. So this process, 6 or 7 years into my career, I was invited to give a presentation at a transportation conference about a project that I managed. It was nothing spectacular. It was the design, spacing, and control of driveways on a busy road in Virginia. So access management, we call it. I was merely invited because they needed to fill a slot. And it was a presentation that fit the general content of this event. So I spent a whole bunch of hours preparing my presentation because I thought, like, this is a big deal. Who am I? It felt like just yesterday I started paying for my own car insurance. But I'm an employee at a reputable consulting firm, and I'm here because we need to get more work. So I'm going to put my all into this. I'm acutely aware of my status, like way down here. So I thought, all right, my strategy is going to go like this. I'm going to give a very clear, linear recap. I'm going to talk about the client's request for proposals, and then my team's approach, and then our analysis and our recommendations, and then I will take a breath and be done. And so I thought, okay, how do I make sure this is professional? All right, my slides are going to be large photos, and I'll have very simple text. You'll be able to read it from the back of the room. I read that in a business book, and it felt right. So I did that, and then I was thinking, hey, this is innovative. I don't see other engineers do this. We were joking about this earlier. It looks like white papers that have been scrunched to fit either portrait or horizontal on a slide, and you can't read anything. So I'm feeling good about this. I deliver the presentation. No computer malfunctions, no slide problems. It went fine. I got a few polite questions at the end in the Q&A, and then afterwards, a couple of people complimented me on the slides, and it felt really good. They asked me where I got the idea to do some slides, and then that was it. And then I go back to the office, and you know what happened then? Nothing happened at all. There were no clients sending emails or calling to be like, hey, about that access management project, we have one. We would really like for your company to come work on our access management project. Nothing happened. 10 years-ish after that, I'll call it a humbling presentation experience. I posted a tweet that led to a $40,000 task order for my company. One tweet. $40,000. How does that happen? That access management talk that I had given, it had all the pertinent information about a contract and what we can do and how we're experts, but we don't brag about being experts. But we got 0 contracts from that work. So the reason is it was a miniature story. It was scrunched into something. So these two things that these few things, schooling, the access management, and then this tweet. All of these things, in hindsight, I see this direct connection to how do you tell a story? You've got to have the right process. And how do you tell a story? You've got to have the right mindset. Good. So, how do you tell a story? You tell a story with the right process. 3 things: hero, conflict, resolution. I didn't say anything about a list of indisputable facts because people are not swayed by indisputable facts. You can see these in any modern day movie, but you can also find this stuff in cave drawings. Hero, conflict, resolution. So the hero is vital in any fiction or nonfiction story. This is the sympathetic focal point. It can be a person that we hope succeeds at whatever they're trying to do. It can be a project or a policy that we're hoping gets adopted. It's inanimate or an actual person. It doesn't really matter, but it's the centerpiece. Blake Snyder is somebody who's famous in writing circles. He was a Hollywood screenwriter for a long, long time. I'll paraphrase his description of a hero because I think it's so easy to remember and useful. So if you imagine watching a movie, an opening scene, a man we know nothing about is walking down a sidewalk. He stops on the sidewalk when he hears what sounds like an animal squealing or crying or making some awful sound. So he stops, looks around, looks up. He sees his cat hanging up on a branch, clutching, piercing meow. So this mystery man reaches up, rescues the cat, carefully puts the cat down, continues down the sidewalk. Instantly, we're cheering for this character, this mystery man. 5 minutes later, he could steal a car. And inside of us, we're going to be going, he had a really good reason to steal the car. We don't know yet, but he had a really good reason to steal that car. It doesn't matter because he starts out by saving the cat. The hero, your hero in any boring transportation story is someone or a thing that would save the cat. So in your stories, what that means is it relate on a personal level before sharing any data or evidence. How can you save the cat? Easier said than done because a hero to some of us is a villain to somebody else. And writing a relatable hero requires understanding that audience. You have to know in advance, are they going to think that my hero is a hero or are they going to think that this hero is a villain? What's important to your audience, or what keeps them up at night? What should be important to your audience, or what should keep them up at night? Think on those things. What are they overlooking? That's the kind of stuff that you can wrap around to be relatable. Now, then this hero has to get into conflict, get them into trouble, or the policy gets into trouble. If nothing happens at all, nothing bad happens, nobody cares. You describe the trouble. You describe if it's policy, if it's something interfering with the policy, you describe what the roadblocks are. Deal with specific pain points. You just have to remember that something does or should keep this audience up at night. And then finally, the resolution. Things get better in the end. Live by that. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule. But if you're selling shared mobility, which I'm pretty sure all of us are, then it's got to be that most of your stories end with a clear improvement. Either it happened already, or there's a path to a clear improvement. So if you look around your community, or you're working on a project in another area, and you look around that area and you think, everybody's dependent on the car, all hope is lost. Then I would say, keep this in mind. That is that we often are told or led to believe that pessimism is some kind of insight. So don't mistake pessimism for insight. And optimism is considered naive. Don't fall for those traps. It gets better in the end. If you're documenting something that already happened and it has a happy ending, great. If not, I'm not suggesting you lie. I'm suggesting you say, what would make things better in the end? What is going to serve the community better? Tell the audience that, how the project or the policy or whatever the thing is, the operation, how can that serve the public interest? So here's an example of how you might put this stuff together. If we consider one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, the bike share operator. So let's say you are going to write a blog post about challenges facing bike share in your community. You want readers thinking positively about your operator. She's the hero, so you got to make her relatable. Make this character be sympathetic to the car owner. Have the car owner be thinking, I can imagine myself riding on this heavy-duty, clunky bicycle just for short-term trips, and have them imagine their neighbors doing the same kind of thing. Think, like, what's happening? What are the challenges? This local bike share, let's say, is losing business. They're having trouble getting local sponsorship. They can't find sponsors. There's probably a debate about helmet laws and what's required there. Street maintenance, who's gonna pay for all this stuff? Who's gonna fix the potholes? Where do we put the bike share stations? What's fair, what's not fair? You articulate all this kind of stuff. It raises the stakes of the hero. And as you're unpacking all of this conflict. And then in the end, how do things get better? Well, mandatory helmet law is overturned, and momentum builds for a robust bicycling network. And now the budget priorities are shifting. They had this Vision Zero policy statement. Now their budget is shifting to align with their other words. It's the one reason why this is so effective, packaging this process of hero conflict and resolution, is that it's not defensive storytelling. It puts you in charge of the story arc. You are deciding who the hero is, what the narrative is, and then the ending, rather than getting into this back and forth of yah-huh, nuh-uh, yah-huh, nuh-uh. That is never effective. So, how do you tell a story? With a hero, a conflict, and a resolution. That is the storytelling process. Now, how do you tell a story? With the right mindset. These three things. My older son is learning Greek right now, and I was struggling mightily with the pronunciation of this. And I kept showing him, look, these different websites, they're giving me multiple ways of how to say these things. But this is what I'm going to say from the bulk of these. These three things are logos, ethos, and pathos. We got the acronym over here. Logos is the appeal to reason. Ethos is the appeal to credibility. Pathos is the appeal to emotion. So this is not a ranking. It's just three ingredients. Just like hero, conflict, and resolution, these three must be present. And these you might recognize, depending on your background, as Aristotle's three modes of persuasion. He basically invented persuasive advertising 2,000 years ago. So if you want to dismiss me, you can, but you're basically dismissing Aristotle. So, logos, reasoning and logic. This is the category we humans like to think we belong in. Especially, I know what it's like to be a teenage boy. You might think as an outsider that this is ridiculous, but we teenage boys think we are the most logical creatures on this planet. But the same is true for adults. It's a funny thing because logic is the sort of thing that you turn on and off like a switch with context. So when I was young, my granddad taught me to love the New York Yankees and hate the Boston Red Sox. No amount of statistics are going to convince me that Boston is a superior team. I don't care what academics you throw my way, I'm going to say, your numbers are manipulated. But then there are other times when I have absolutely been swayed by an appeal to reason. I listened to a presentation that I still will send peers towards, comparing the before and after of transitions of traffic signals to roundabouts. And this thing was nothing but data with some images to go along with it. And I was scribbling notes because at the time I had no idea that any self-respecting American would defend a roundabout, let alone promote in public a roundabout. Because up until that point in my career, all I had heard was, what are we, France? But this particular presenter demonstrated ways that replacing signals with roundabouts would save thousands of lives. It was a direct appeal to reason. There was some extra emotional baggage if you started to think through on your own about implications of safety, but it was all about specific logic. If this, then that. Ethos is making an appeal to credibility, and that is pretty common because it's easy to assume that a person with a bunch of credentials is an expert in whatever that thing is. If they have a lot of years experience along with credentials, then they probably have the right answers. But there's a giant caveat, and that is some of us just don't like some experts. I'm not gonna like your expert, and you're not gonna like my expert. Some experts don't agree with each other. Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs, I'm guessing many of us are familiar with, they were each experts in different fields, but in one overlapping topic having to do with what to do or not do in New York City and other places. Experts don't always agree. So what I would want you to do is, rather than stop with presenting in a story, how do I think of myself as the expert so that I establish some credibility, some status, some authority, so that people will trust me? Yes, that is important. I want you to go a step further and think of the opposing view and establish some credibility and speak to the credibility of the opposing point of view. And the reason why I think this is the way to go is, if you look at the fiction writing, the best villains are nuanced. They're not all bad all the time. I mean, even the legendary ones like Lex Luthor was opposed to Superman because it's an all-powerful alien who could at any moment extinguish the human race. And so the storyline of Lex was, I'm here to defend mankind. Like, that's what got him going. So a great villain, and if you think about the credibility when you're writing a story and thinking, what's the opposition thinking? The more you think about how are they credible, the stronger your position is going to be, and the more you're going to persuade people around you that are listening in. One quick example that I've heard a couple of different times during the conference, as an example of opposition. It doesn't have to be a Lex Luthor figure. The opposition could be somebody as sweet as a commuter who doesn't trust the local bus to come and get them in less than an hour, versus a 10-minute car ride. So the little things like this, I say opposition, which might sound harsh. I mean opposition to your point of view. You want shared mobility. You want to promote transit. You want to promote these types of things. What is the credibility and the point of view of the opposition? And then pathos is the emotion. This one, I mean, maybe it's obvious, I think, at this point in the internet age, we have easy access to information, so we can see things about human nature and what sociologists have learned about people that were so irrational. But I think one thing that we experience all the time is music. We can't explain this about humans, that music can make you happy or sad or excited or calm. So you all know this. You know that we're emotional creatures. So definitely do not dismiss this when it comes to technical storytelling about whatever the bike share, car share, any of the things related to transportation. Still find a way to make an appeal to emotion. I want to give you a kind of sideways view of the appeal to emotion, rather than saying, what's a really sad thing to include, or a really happy thing? You'll always be able to make an easy attachment like that. But stated positions versus shared interests. This is one of the hallmarks of negotiating. A stated position is, we need every bit of on-street parking here on this street. Every single parking space must remain. A city's stated position might be, hey, next month, we're going to remove all of this on-street parking. These two things cannot happen at the same time, right? These two stated positions are at complete odds with each other. Everybody's going to be angry, of course. A shared interest is something like, we want to have a safe, quiet street. And you start talking about what could make a safe, quiet street. Turns out a safe, quiet street is a place that's really comfortable and attractive to walk around and ride a bicycle and let the kids hang out, and if a soccer ball goes into the street, not a big deal. Suddenly, everybody's moving in the same direction because it's not about this position versus this position. Suddenly, it's we all share the same interest. Now what do we do? When you start arranging these three ingredients, these appeals to logic and credibility and emotion, they're magical results. You're gonna feel like you saw a unicorn. It's nuts how well it works. I wish there was an easy recipe to say it's this % of credibility and this % of emotion and so on, but having those three together is phenomenal. So you could draw a couple of conclusions from what I've said so far about these two types, the process and the mindset. The first, you could throw your hands up and say, what's the point? Because some people are gonna think that my hero is the villain. Some people are gonna ignore my data and my pie charts. How much do I lean into emotion? How much of it should I use? But I would say this stuff as a way of encouragement. If it was easy, we would all do it all the time. We would already be making persuasive stories all the time. We would be 100% accuracy with knowing which politicians need to be given which bits of information. We would be unstoppable. But it doesn't happen. It's hard. So what I suggest is think of these storytelling ingredients as something that you would keep in the kitchen pantry. So different projects get different recipes. You'll reach in, you'll get different variations from time to time. One for the town council maybe, one for the state DOT, one for a local parents group. Each one's gonna get their different recipe card. If you think of it in that way, I think it's a lot more approachable, that this is all manageable for any person at any time. It's just little stuff that we're trying. I wanna wrap up by talking just a little bit about empathy, which is something that I still struggle with. I want to be empathetic all the time. I don't know if this is true of all of you in this room or people within this room, but I know that's definitely true of members of this, people that attend this conference in the past, because I watch you on Twitter. I'm there with you. Some of you want to ban cars and fossil fuel to serve the traveling public. Some of you want to use cars and fossil fuel to serve the traveling public. Some of you want to have the government regulate everything to serve the greater good. And some of you would say, let's have the government regulate nothing to serve the greater good. Empathy is this type of mind reading. It's the ability to imagine what somebody might be thinking, but this is what makes it so challenging. It requires thinking the best and highest of someone, even if you think they're an awful person or an awful organization. So for most of us, maybe every human being, the normal impulse is to imagine, it's easy to first imagine what somebody's gonna be thinking, but it's based on our superior knowledge and our problem-solving ability as an individual. And what we do is we turn both our allies and our opponents into these caricatures. That's the straw man. It's the flimsy version of somebody's worldview that's just easily dismissed. A straw man argument would be what you see all the time in corporate media with headlines or sound bites on 2-minute segments of talk shows. The opposite of a straw man, what I want you to do, what I'm trying to do, is make a steel man. It's the strongest possible case that your opponent would make. What is the best that they have to offer? Why would they really, if their intentions are to serve the traveling public, why might they want this particular thing? You can't be empathetic if you're not willing to steel man the opponent's or the opposition kind of point of view. Here's a little mind bender on this, that kerosene saved the whales. I mean, when I was growing up, saving the whales was a big deal. But way before I was even born, whales were hunted for their oil. It turned into this enormous industry. I don't remember the exact year. our esteemed professor probably has this, but candle wax and lamps were kind of a big deal, and that was because of hunting whales for their oil. But we were going to end up emptying the ocean of whales. So part of the oil industry's legacy with kerosene was saving the whales. Plastic containers, they pile up in our landfills. Plastic containers are also delivering clean water to desperate villages all over the world. Hospitals use gobs of energy. Hospitals with gobs of energy are also keeping premature babies alive. So nothing is as easy as good, bad, good, bad. Steelman that position. So what if you're talking about energy or electric vehicles or charging or the grid, whatever it is we're talking about, and you know that you have an opposing point of view, what is the strongest possible case that they're making for society that's coming up against yours? One of the biggest risks, I think, for shared mobility organizations or for vendors might be to try to be everything to everyone. There's a time-tested saying in marketing that if you try to market to everyone, you market to no one. It's been proven just over and over and over again. So figure out who you need to reach first. Come up with the compelling stories for them first, that core audience. One quick comparison on that is Google is a search engine. They figure the faster someone leaves Google, the better. They're measuring in fractions of a second. How fast can I get at Google someone off of Google? That means that their search was good. Yelp is also a search engine with the opposite metrics. So they want you to stay on the site, leave reviews, make reservations. Google and Yelp, both search engines, very different core audiences. So I'm sure there are two mobility operators in this room who have two different core audiences and can both flourish. But know your particular audience. Figure out what is your key audience. What do they need to hear? And then you don't need to persuade a vast majority of our country's population or even of your county or your city's population. This is the most encouraging part, I think. To shift culture, you only need a motivated minority. Another thing that's been proven over and over and over again throughout history. One of my favorite quotes is from a writer named Michael Margolis. He says, to understand a culture, listen to their stories. To change a culture, tell new stories. Know your audience, empathize with your audience, and then tell new stories to change the modern transportation culture. So, how do you tell those stories? With the right process, hero, conflict, resolution. And how do you tell these new transportation stories? With the right mindset, logos, ethos, pathos. Thanks for sharing your time with me tonight.